Sorry, I'm getting my own. I was going to say, who's that? But it's me. So, all right, I'm here with the author of this blog, Aaron Schelenberger. So I'll introduce you to him in a little bit, but we're going to talk about a paper that was published in a journal, and I'll just show you here the PDF that Aaron shared with me some time ago. So we're going to talk about this article that was published in the Christian Apologetics Journal in 2009. So it's the 10th anniversary, Aaron. But Aaron has changed his mind on this article. So without any further ado, I'll just introduce Aaron here and have him tell us a little bit about the article, why you wrote it, and just some of the arguments there. What the article is about, Aaron.
Hello there. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Carlos, for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on this article and why I changed my mind on John 17:3. So pretty much this article was written in an attempt to nullify some objections presented by Jehovah's Witnesses and Unitarians in general. There are pretty much two contentions. And number one, the contention says that only the Father is the true God. And that's based on John 17:3. That's one contention that I kept hearing. The other contention is only the Father is the only true God. Now, those contentions or objections don't really, well, at the time that I wrote the article, those contentions didn't really match what John 17:3 was saying. When we read it, it appears to say that the Father is the only true God, not only the Father is the true God, or only the Father is the only true God. And for that reason, when I was pursuing a graduate degree in Christian apologetics, I felt like I had to write this article. And we can get into the details later on. Now, before I move on, let me let Carlos make comments.
No, you're good. So you wrote this at a time when you were a proponent of the doctrine of the Trinity. So one of the arguments I hear a lot, and here's the verse in question, by the way, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and the one you have sent, Jesus Christ. So this is very popular in so-called biblical Unitarian circles, because Jesus here praying to the Father, Jesus oftentimes does that. He prays to someone in heaven who he calls the Father. Most of the time this happens in the Gospel of John, the Father and Son language. That's what the gospel itself is famous for. So biblical so-called Unitarians claim that, well, here it is. Jesus clearly is identifying one individual as the only true God. So if Jesus says that the Father, in context, right? So we get that from verse 1. So Jesus spoke these things. He looked up to heaven and said, Father. So he's obviously addressing the Father. So biblical Unitarians say, well, there you go. Why a Trinity if the only true God is the Father? So you argued in this paper that although did you recognize at the time, did you um, accept the fact that the Father is called the only true God, yet you also believe that the Son is also the only true God?
Yeah, in a roundabout fashion, I did. Uh, Back when I was a Trinitarian, I was able to reconcile the statement, the Father is the only true God, and Jesus Christ is the only true God, in addition to God the Father. Now, Trinitarians back then and even nowadays, whenever Unitarians, such as biblical Unitarians or Jehovah's Witnesses or Arians in general, whenever they bring this verse up, what comes to the minds of the Trinitarians is this: all they hear is, well, okay, you're using that verse to you affirm what we affirm, this statement, namely, the Father is the only true God. We agree with that. But whenever you argue for it, whenever you try to, explain it, it comes out as though you're saying either of the two. One is only the Father is the true God. The other one is only the Father is the only true God. That's what's coming to us as Trinitarians, if that ever makes sense.
So for a Trinitarian, it's hard to reconcile the fact that the Father is the only true God. In other words, in the absolute sense of the word, we know that, just for the sake of our audience out there, Aaron, we know that the Bible is very loose with the word God. By that I mean human beings are called God, right?
Right.
Moses is called God twice in Exodus and so on.
Yeah.
Jesus himself in John 10, as most Trinitarians concede, calls the judges of Israel God in John 10. So
Mhm.
that's what I mean by the Bible being loose with the word God. But in the ultimate sense of the word, which is what we as biblical Unitarians believe Jesus is doing in this verse, he's using the word in an ultimate absolute sense, because he says that that person he's addressing, the Father, is the only true God. So if I can quickly ask you, did in this paper that we're discussing here, that you're now refuting because you have changed your mind, did you at the time use other verses to show that although you accept as a Trinitarian that the Father is the only true God, do you use other verses in this paper to prove that the Son is also the only true God?
Oh, yeah. I used the standard Trinitarian biblical texts, such as John 20:28, John 1:1, 1 John 5:20. Although I had some doubts with 1 John 5:20, I also used Hebrews 1:8, and even the verses or passages that aren't directly saying Jesus is God. He is the co-creator with the Father. He knew all things, according to John.
Mhm.
All power has been given unto me, says in Matthew 28. All of those put together somehow were enough, right, to
Mhm.
establish that not only is the Father the only true God, but Jesus too
Uh,
is the
tell
only
me,
true God.
tell me about this verse in particular. You said even as a Trinitarian, you had reservations for
Yeah,
using 1 John 5:20. Why is that?
because it didn't really ring a bell in me. I mean, part of me says, "Oh man, you really have to take this as saying, the true God is Jesus. The antecedent here is Jesus to the true God." But grammatically, contextually, I wasn't. Yeah, I was on the fence. I was sort of, back and forth, depending on who I was talking to. I would use that as sort of like, well, 50-50, yeah. And besides, even scholars are not even, agreed on this particular text that supports the Trinity or specifically the deity of Jesus.
Right. So it's not as clear as John 17:3, obviously.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So also, before we get to your refutation, just quickly, so as a Trinitarian, when you say and accept this verse, John 17:3, yes, the Father is the only true God, but that doesn't mean the Son is also the only true God. I think you have said that you are studying, or you studied logic. In apologetics, you studied that branch of philosophy about contradictions and fallacies and so on.
Right, right.
So how did you not see that as a Trinitarian when you say that two subjects can be at the same time only true, right?
Right.
How did you, in your mind, as a philosopher, logician, reconcile that as not being a contradiction? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think I do. Now, first of all, the Trinitarian is not saying that John 17:3, says that Jesus too is the only true God. I know you're not asking that question, but I'm just trying to clarify that. But the way I, as somebody who knew logic and who was into apologetics, um, dealt with that was this. For all we know, God may be more than one person. So whenever we read a text like John 17:3, if we were to impose our own ideas about ourselves as humans, well, naturally we would tend to say, well, okay, God must be one person, namely the Father. And so my strategy was, when I wrote this paper, was not necessarily to provide proof for the deity of Jesus in particular, or for the Trinity, but merely to nullify the idea, this argument that says that this verse establishes that Jesus is denying his being the only true God, or the one God, or the true God for that matter. And so, like I've said, I wasn't even trying to, prove the Trinity. I was just trying to, neutralize the objection. Now, just because I was able to neutralize, it does not mean that the Trinity or the deity of Jesus is true. I still had to, in my mind, I still was carrying the burden to establish the Trinity, and the deity of Jesus. But when you study apologetics, you will learn that the practice or discipline of apologetics has two aspects to it. It's a twofold task, if you will. One is to provide proof for what you believe, right? And not only that, you also answer objections. You nullify them, or you neutralize those objections. Because if those objections are there and they get lodged up in your position, in your apologetic effort, then guess what? Those objections become very powerful. Your position or your case cannot go through, if you will. And so my task in this particular paper was to merely neutralize or nullify that, those objections that, I'm about to get into. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
I kind of went too far there.
No, that's good. And just quickly, on page 6, I've been dying to ask you this for a while since I read this. On page 6 there, as you can see,
Right.
you say that there is an implicit equivocation of two phrases. You, that is the Father, the only true God, and only you, again, the Father, the true God. In attempting to justify this, the Watchtower appeals to one of the translations, the NEB, that reads, to know thee, who alone are truly God, Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent, and so on. My question is, so is there an is there still in your mind an equivocation? In other words, are we playing fast and loose in however we read that verse, whether we read it as you say here, you, the only true God, or only you, the true God? Is there any difference in that? And if so, what is the difference?
Well, I can get into the details later on as I get into the presentation of my PowerPoint. At this point, today, right now, yes, there are wording differences, but in practical application and in the way the language is put together, those two really mean the same thing.
Right. That is my, sorry, I wasn't clear with my question.
It's okay. It's okay.
My
Because
question
yeah.
should have been, it seems like in this paper you said 10 years ago
Right.
that those two sayings
We're not the same.
have a different meaning. Of course, they're worded differently.
Yeah.
But they have the same meaning to us now. But
Well,
back then, it didn't to you. Is that what you're saying?
that is correct. Yeah. They did
Okay.
not mean the same thing because they were not worded the same way.
Right. Okay. All right. Let's get to you sent me a little PowerPoint here. Is that all right?
Oh, yeah.
So let's get to now. You changed. You obviously are not a Trinitarian. In other words, you don't believe the one God of Israel is no longer three persons, but one absolute individual. Obviously, by the way, for our audience, when we say person, God is a person, we obviously are not meaning God is a human being or any such blasphemy. That's blasphemous.
When we say God is one person or a person, we simply mean that God is a person in the same sense as human beings are persons, or an individual human being like me is a person. And a person has a will, a consciousness, emotions, and there is that unity of thought, volition, will, and consciousness and awareness. That's all. It's a self, per Dr. Dale Tuggy's, usage of or
description, right?
of what a person is.
Right, and we're heavy on the fact that it's one. It's not two Aarons, not three Aarons, but
right.
just the one Aaron. So let's get to your PowerPoint here. Let me bring it up for people. So you take us through this and you tell me when to stop, when to roll, etc.
Okay. All right. Now, before I start the presentation, by way of introduction, what really changed my mind is not because of what I changed my mind on what I wrote on the paper. Initially, it was something else, which I'll get into later. In other words, even if my paper was correct, even if I was able to nullify the objections presented by Jehovah's Witnesses in particular and Unitarians in general, I still was able to change my mind about my view on the nature of God, and specifically on John 17:3. Now, let's look at the next slide there, Carlos. So there are two contentions that I've identified. The first is only the Father is the true God. The other one is only the Father is the only true God. Okay, next. But it seems to me back then, the Father is the only true God according to John 17:3. Now, when I say it seems, when we read John 17:3, it's not necessarily this statement, by the way, and I'll show you. Okay, next. Now let's look at the contention one. Only the Father is the true God. Okay, now this particular contention makes the following argument. Since Christ places the Father in the category true God, it must mean that he does not place himself in the category. That is to say, only the Father belongs in the category true God, right? That's what the contention says here. Now, next. The problem with that is this. The statement, only the Father is the true God, is not the same as the Father is the only true God. Okay? In my paper, I attempted to demonstrate that those two, because primarily they're not worded the same way, those two meant differently. They meant different things. Now, let's look at the next slide, please. Now, let's go back to the previous slide. I'm sorry. Okay. In my attempt to show that those two statements, only the Father is a true God and the Father is the only true God, in my attempt to respond to that, I put together this informal argument. As you can see, since Christ places the Father in the category true God, it must mean that he does not place himself in the category. Only the Father belongs in the category true God. Now, basically, in my mind back then, those two statements are not the same. They're different. Now,
sorry, Aaron, if I could just butt in.
Sure.
As we said, they're obviously worded differently.
Right.
So in that way, they're not the same. But now you believe that they mean the same thing. So there's a difference between meaning and wording. So the wording, two statements can have different wordings,
right,
but they can mean the same thing. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they can mean the same thing. Now, believe it or not, even if, okay, let me see. Even when I believe this, right, I still was able to overcome my Trinitarian belief, right? Because I have another reason why I changed my mind on the Trinity. Specifically, one of the reasons why was because of the way I read John 17:3. Now, when you read John 17:3, could you go back to that verse, please?
John 17:3?
Yeah.
Yep. Let me, where are we here?
I thought you had
right there.
Okay, now take a look at this verse. This is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and the one you have sent. Now, this verse doesn't really say the Father is the only true God, does it? It doesn't. What you see is an appositive. You, the only true God. Well, guess what? Appositives can be interchangeably, put together in a sentence. So, for example, you are the only true God, right? That's one way. The other way is the only true God is you. So when you say the Father is the only true God, that's one way to read this. That's one way to take this. The Father is the only true God. The other way is only the only true God is the Father. Now, let's go back to the slide. I now realize that it's going to be, yeah. I now realize that, let's see here. I now realize that these two really mean the same thing. Now, take the sentence, the only true God is the Father. Well, guess what? That's similar to only the Father is the true God. Does that make sense?
Sorry, you're asking me.
Well, I'm asking if it makes sense that when we say only the Father is a true God, that is equivalent to saying the true God, the only true God is the Father. Those are actually the same thing.
Yeah, like I told you, the meaning to me is the same.
Right.
I think to most people, again, if you change this, by the way, if you say only Aaron, right,
Yeah.
is the true president, let's say, and then the next you change it up, you say Aaron is the only true president. Yes, they're worded differently, but it has the same meaning that you are the only true president. I mean, that's how I think.
Yeah, the other way to deal with that is by saying, for example, Rowena is my only wife. Well, if Rowena is my only wife, then no one else is, right? I have no other wife than Rowena. Now, if I say only Rowena is my wife, well, if only Rowena is my wife, then I have no other. It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
So why, if I can get into your site, if I can play Dr. Phil, why did you at the time make it so difficult for yourself? Like, why and how did you convince yourself that although worded differently, these two statements, they really do mean the same? Why couldn't you get to that place where you are supposedly now?
Because of my insistence in my mind that, it was my desire to defend the Trinity, specifically to defend the deity of Jesus.
So you were beholden. You were, beholden to a prisoner to the doctrine of the Trinity.
Right.
Thing that I think the so-called Athanasius Creed, as you know, says there are three almighties, but one Almighty. So things, I mean, language that is difficult.
Yeah. Now, there's one more thing that I'd like to bring up. As a matter of fact, it was during that first question you had for me when you flashed the article. Can you go back to the article? That question you had?
Sure.
Yeah.
On page 6 and 7.
Yes.
Yep. An implicit equivocation of two phrases.
Yeah. So if you look at the second sentence, in attempting to justify this, the Watchtower appeals to how the NEB renders John 17:3. This is eternal life, to know thee who alone art truly God. Now, take a look at those words. Who alone art truly God. Guess what? Who is the who here? The Father, right? So you simply take it as the Father alone are truly God. The Father is the true God. The Father alone. Only the Father. Are you getting what I'm saying? Now, if you're listening to me, your audience, if you miss that, you're missing something big. This particular rendition actually tells you that the Father alone is true God. Or in other words, only the Father is the true God. Therefore, there is no equivocation here. Those things really mean the same thing.
What would
Right.
you say to those? Because in my experience, most Trinitarians, if not everyone who believes Jesus is God, accepts what the text is saying here, right?
Yeah.
But the problem comes in with in my experience,
With framing it as a statement.
well, when they say to me, yes, but that doesn't mean the Son is also the only true God. So
Who's saying
how
that?
Trinitarians in general say
No,
that?
they're saying that the Son is also true God.
Right. So
By now,
how would you answer that? They accept the text there that says the Father is the only true God,
right.
but that doesn't mean they say that the Son is not also true God. do, do you get the
Well, like I've said, only if we assume, okay, now the Trinitarian is assuming that the only way to frame these words, you, comma, the only true God, is the Father is the only true God. If we assume that that's the only way to frame it, guess what? Well, of course, you know, there may be someone else who is also the only true God. But if we allow the possibility, and it does allow us the possibility that the only true God is the Father, guess what? The idea of Jesus being also the one true God is ruled out.
right? It should be, but in like I told you, in my experience, they keep claiming
Right.
that someone else can also be in that category somehow. So let's go ahead and
Okay.
continue
Well,
your
yeah. One more thing. One more
okay.
thing. Dr. Dale Tuggy of Trinities.org made a very good point in my interview with him, podcast number 256, saying that that word only is merely a quantifying term, is not really a predication. The predication is true God. That is why those two sentences, namely, only the Father is a true God and the Father is the only true God, are really, they really mean the same thing. And like I've said, by way of an example, Rowena is my wife, my only wife, and if she's my only wife, then no one else is. Because the word only quantifies, it's a quantifying term in this statement. It is not a predication to Rowena or to the wife. It quantifies, it makes an exclusive declaration or statement,
Right, claim.
or
Claim.
assertion or claim that there is only, the Father is the only true God. Well, if the Father is the only true God, then no one else is, not even Jesus, right?
Well, yeah, no one else should be, but it's a
Right.
it's a
We can go ahead
mystery.
and move on to the next.
Go ahead.
Okay, now this other contention says that only the Father is the only true God, right? Now, the previous one says, okay, let's see here. The previous one says only the Father is the true God, but the contention two, on the other hand, says only the Father is the only true God. Now, this contention is arguing as follows. Since Christ places the Father in the category only true God, it follows that he does not place himself in the category to which only the Father belongs. Now, the problem is when this argument is framed in a number of formal logical arguments, they all fail. Now, this is where we can get into technicalities. When we say that a logical argument in a categorical syllogistic form, right? When that syllogism is valid, it means that the distribution of terms, major terms, minor terms, are properly done. The terms are distributed properly. And so I can get into that later. So we're going to put that aside for now and moving on to the next slide here. Now, here is why I changed my mind. Well, number one, believe it or not, I assume that my paper is correct. Even if my paper was correct, right, I still was able to overcome my Trinitarian belief. How is that? Well, number two, I looked not only at John 17:3, but other parts of the Bible. And in doing so, I realized that according to the Bible, only the Father is identified as the only true God, John 17:3, the only God, John 5:44, and the one God, 1 Corinthians 8:6, 1 Timothy 2:5. And no one else is, not even Jesus. And so that is one of the other items. Next slide.
Just if I can ask you, Aaron.
Sure.
Does that mean that you don't believe Jesus is ever called God in the New Testament?
Oh, it doesn't mean that.
Yes. Does number 3 mean that for you right now, you don't believe Jesus is even called God in the New Testament?
Well, I believe that he's called God.
Okay, but so just for the sake of our audience, when we talk about Jesus is not God, we mean in the ultimate sense as
Exactly.
the only God, as the only true God. Okay.
That is correct. And in fact, that my next slide comes into that. So I realized that according to the Bible, only the Father is identified as God in the ultimate sense. That is to say, the Father is almighty, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, eternal, and so on. And no one else is identified as such, not even Jesus.
So what does it mean when the writer of Hebrews, so let me, if I may, interrupt you there.
Sure.
And let's go to a text which most of us have to agree with, right? Biblical Unitarians and Trinitarians.
Sure.
Hebrews 1:8. But to the Son, so this is the Father speaking about the Son, your throne, God, is forever, and so on. So there's a common consensus here that Jesus, the Son here, is referred to as God.
Yeah, the Father called the Son God. Okay.
Right. So one God, the Father, refers to someone else as God. So in what way is Jesus God then, if to you now, the Son is no longer the only true God? The Son has ceased to be God in the ultimate sense, in the absolute sense, as you put it. So in what way is Jesus God to you now if he's not the only true God?
The word God is, like you said earlier, is loosely used in the New Testament. People are called God, judges are called God, even Satan in Corinthians is called God. God simply means someone who is powerful. Now, whether that power, or authority is intrinsic in that individual, like Satan or people or Jesus in this case, that's another issue. Jesus being God is not because he is intrinsically God in the ultimate sense, that he is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, eternal, and so on. And when we look at Hebrews 1:8, this particular verse, when let's just say that this does call, Jesus God. Well, contextually, he cannot be the ultimate God here. When you read the context, he is the Son. He's given the authority. God, the Father, spoke through his Son. And by the way, like what you've just highlighted there, this God had a God or has a God. Now, to be sure, there is another way to interpret verse 8. It may mean that God in verse 8 is a reference to the Father. That is to say, God is your throne, right? That is possible. And I welcome that. Now, the other thing to consider too is when this was written, it was from the premise that, to my understanding, it was a king in the Old Testament it was addressed to. And you can talk more about this. In fact, you've discussed this extensively, Carlos.
Yes, it's
The referent here is not, God, the ultimate God, the Father or Yahweh. Who is the referent here? Who is the speaker making a reference? My heart is moved by a noble theme as I recite my verses to the King. My tongue is the pen of a skillful writer. You are most handsome of men. Grace flows from your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever. Mighty warrior, strap your sword at your side. In your majesty and splendor, in your splendor ride triumphantly. And your throne, God, is forever and ever. So the speaker was talking to, contextually speaking, not to the ultimate God, the Almighty God, as I see it. Would you not agree, Carlos?
right. So I think the scholarly consensus majority is right. Majority does rule here, I believe. So let's go back to your PowerPoint there.
Okay, at this point, like I've said, even with my assumption that my paper was correct in everything it said, right, in everything that it argued for, even if I was successful in my nullification of the objections, given all these facts, I still was able to overcome my belief in the Trinity. I still was able to, now believe that only the Father is the only true God or the true God. And do you have a question at this point? Because I can go back to the contention 1 and 2.
No, we can go back if you want.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next.
Next one. Okay.
Yeah, next one after that, because I put their solution. As you
Okay.
can see, I just added the word solution there and
Right.
that statement. Although only the Father is the true God, is not the same wording as the Father is the only true God. The way the language is used, the two mean the same thing, pretty much. And we've discussed that already. And let's move on to the next one. This one, the solution is, although some of the formal arguments fail, there is one that succeeds. Now, in my paper, I put together 3 syllogisms, categorical syllogisms. And it seems to me that the first 2 fail. If you were to, let's see, okay, go to formal fallacies. It's like 3 pages down. It's kind of hard to see, but yeah. Yeah, my attempt was to show that, as you can see here, propositions in a categorical syllogism involve the question of truth and validity, right? So in other words, are the premises true? If so, is the way the argument is framed valid? If it's so, then the whole argument is sound or good. Now let's move on to the next page there. Next page. Two arguments together,
Sorry,
the premises, when you think about it,
you broke up. Can you repeat the last?
Yeah. Okay. Can you see the? Can you see? Okay, page 14 down below. Go down.
Further down.
I'm having a hard time seeing this because I'm looking at my phone right now.
Yeah. How's that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, hear you. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Can you? How about this? Let's just go straight to. Let's just go straight to my PowerPoint.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Go to the next page, which is going to be the last page of this. Now, of those 3 arguments, back then, those arguments I thought failed, right? To demonstrate that Christ is not the only true God. The conclusion of all those 3 was Christ is not the only true God. That was the conclusion of each of those categorical syllogisms. Now that I've thought about it for a long time, the first 2 still fail. They still fail because although the premises are true, right? The fact of the matter is the way the argument is put together in terms of the distribution.
Sorry, you broke up again. The distribution?
Is true. Now, hear me.
You're breaking up.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Okay, we got you. Go ahead.
How about this? Where was I?
The distribution?
Yeah. Like I've said, in my paper, I presented 3 arguments that attempt to show that Christ is not the only true God, right? Of those, back then I thought they all failed. It's either they're invalid, or even if they're valid, the at least one of the premises is false, therefore they didn't go through, they failed, right? But nowadays, the first 2 are still, they still fail as arguments, because even though the premises are true, right? The way the arguments were put together was invalid. Now, there's a third argument, which is this. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. It
You're
says,
good.
Premise 1, the only true God is the Father. Premise 2, the Father is not Christ. Conclusion, therefore, Christ is not the only true God. Now, in order for a syllogism to go through, or an argument to go through, it would have to be valid, and the premises have to be true. Now, when you analyze the validity of this argument, the distribution of the major and the minor terms is properly put together, is properly done. So the only true God is distributed, the Father, we're looking at premise 1 now. The Father is undistributed. When you look at premise 2, the Father is distributed, not Christ is also distributed. And so for that matter, when you look at the conclusion, therefore Christ is not the only true God, Christ here is distributed, not the only true God is also distributed. We're getting into technicalities now, okay? And anybody there that could verify this, please bring it up. Bring up if I made a mistake, correct myself, of course. Studied, this is a valid argument. Now, are the premises true? If so, then guess what? The argument is good. The argument is considered sound. All right. Now let's move backward here. Premise 2, the Father is not Christ. Do we all agree? Trinitarians agree. Biblical Unitarians agree, right? Arians, Jehovah's Witnesses agree with the statement, the Father is not Christ. Who disagrees with it, with this statement? The oneness. Well, we're not arguing with the oneness here. We're arguing, we're debating the Trinitarian here, okay? So the Trinitarian gladly accept premise 2, all right? So they agree with premise 2, the Father is not Christ. What about premise 1? The only true God is the Father. Do the biblical Unitarians accept this? Yeah. Arians, yes. Jehovah's Witnesses, yes. But what about the Trinitarians? What do you think, Carlos?
Well, like I told you, in my experience, most of them say yes, but the Son, that doesn't mean the Son is also the only true God. I mean, that's been my experience thus far. And I think it's true even for people like Michael Brown and James White. I put a question like this, similar to him, in the Tiger debate.
Right.
And he didn't really refute it. But yeah, so I think, I don't know, it's a good question to ask Trinis on social media, but if you're asking me, my experience has been yes, they'll say, but that doesn't mean the Son is
Do you think
also
the Trinitarian would accept this statement? The only true God is the Father.
The ones yes, because they're all true God, right? According to the creeds, their creeds, right? The Son is true God.
Who knows, such as Robert Bowman.
Sir, I lost you again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Bowman, you said?
Yeah, Dr. Robert Bowman would not accept that statement.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Because there is a difference between saying the Father is the only true God, right?
Right.
The Father is under the true God. He is classed under the true God, the only true God.
Right, but
so the Father is the only true God. The Son is the only true God. The Holy Spirit is the only true God. That's different from saying the only true God is the Father. That means only the Father is the true God, or the only true God.
But that's, we might have stumbled into something interesting here.
Right.
As you know, their creed, the Nicene Creed, not the Nicene Chalcedon Creed, but the 325 Creed, says this, right? We believe in one God, the Father Almighty.
Okay.
Which is interesting because that's a Unitarian declaration. But see how it says that the Son, the only Son, is eternal, right? and he is
Yeah.
true God from true God.
Right.
So if you're saying that apologists like Robert Bowman, who is a name out there, and hopefully he'll watch this. So if Bowman doesn't agree that the Father is true God just as much as the Son is true God.
No. He does not. He agrees that the Father is the only true God, but he does not agree that only the Father is only the.
Sorry.
He does not agree. True God is the Father.
I lost you. I think you said they don't agree with the word only. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. The Father.
Right. Sorry, your connection is very bad.
Disagree. Only.
Yeah, we lost you.
Oh.
Sorry, you there?
Yeah, you're freezing.
Yeah, you're breaking up.
I just wonder if. Yeah. Hold
Go
on.
ahead.
Maybe it's. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're freezing. I wonder if you're cold. No, it's my joke. Okay. Yeah, can you hear me? So again, Dr. Bowman, he accepts the statement, the Father is the only true God, but he does not accept the statement, the only true God is the Father. Like I've said,
okay.
That's like saying Socrates is a man, and man is Socrates. Are you following it?
Yeah.
So if a man is Socrates, guess what? All men are Socrates. But that's not true. It is right to say that Socrates is a man, but it is not right. It is not proper to say that a man is Socrates, because there are other men who are not Socrates.
So as the verse stands, right? As John 17:3 stands,
right?
So the Father is the only true God.
Yeah.
The way it's worded, the way it stands, right? That they may know you, right? Who's the you? Obviously the Father.
Right.
So would you have accepted the way the verse stood as a Trinitarian, and do most Trinitarians accept it as it stands?
Well, I would not have accepted to interpret this as saying the only true God is the Father.
Well,
I would not.
Who's you there?
You is the Father.
Right. But he's not the only true God.
I'm just saying that the way I thought back in the days when I was a Trinitarian.
Right, and which is how you're saying most Trinitarians today, they would not accept it the way it stands, that is who else? The Father is the only true God. They don't accept that, you're saying?
No. We have to be very careful here, because first of all, they accept you, the only true God. They accept that. They accept you, the Father, is the only true God. Right? Now we're adding the linking verb is. You, the Father, is the only true God. They accept that.
Right. So the Trinitarian reads, they don't have a problem reading the Father in the word you?
They don't.
Okay, so the Father is the only true God, right?
That's right. They accept that.
Right. Okay.
But what they don't accept is, going backwards, the only true God is the Father.
Right.
In other words, when you say it that way, in fact, in my paper, there is what's called contraposition.
Mm-hmm.
The statement, let me see here. Are you still with me?
Yep.
Okay. The statement, the only true God is the Father, is logically equivalent to only the Father is the only true God. There's a way to do it. There is a logical contraposition. Again, the only true God is the Father is logically equivalent to the statement, only the Father is the only true God.
Mm-hmm.
So, do we have any? Well, it's up to you if you have any questions, or maybe any more questions, or maybe the audience, if there's anybody watching.
Yeah, because we've had some problems with the connection today, but no,
Right, right.
is there any any advice to to those people who say, yes, the Father, the only true God, but the Son is also the only true God. See, that's my my main gripe right now, because I hear that a lot, and
Right.
how can we help those people? Because you need help when you're saying that. You're obviously saying, well, actually, let me put it in a question form.
Yeah.
Why is that a contradiction to you as a logician,
Sure.
as a philosopher? Why me saying the Father is the only true God and the Son is so? Why am I making a contradictory declaration by
Yes,
saying that?
you are.
How? Why?
Because when you say that the Father is the only true God, if that's the case, then no one else is. It's just the nature of the language. There's no way around it. It's inescapable. It's similar to, like I've said, my wife, well, Rowena is my only wife. Well, if she's my only wife, then no one else is, right? Now, there is this accusation from Trinitarians that that says Unitarians are assuming Unitarianism when they say something like that. No, I'm not. We're not even assuming it. We're simply asking the question, pretty much. If Rowena is my only wife, who else is my wife? No one else. If the Father is the only true God, who else is the true God or the only true God? No one else. If Trump is the only US president, who else is the US president aside from Trump? Now, if the verse says the Father and the Son are the only true God, then yes.
Well,
Now we're talking.
I was going to ask you just that, Aaron.
Right.
What if the verse actually is putting it this way? This is how it should be understood. Eternal life consists in acknowledging you and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent as the only true God. Would that then not prove?
Oh yeah, that would. Oh man, that would be.
So what's wrong with this picture to you?
Yeah, and now you included Jesus Christ as the only true God. Because although whom you have sent is a positive, right? The as the only true God is also a positive, is distributing to Jesus Christ and to you. So yeah, here we're talking two individuals who are both the only true God.
Right.
Now, whether or not those are two gods, that's another story,
Mm-hmm.
But at least it's saying that not only is you the Father, but also Jesus Christ is classified as the only true God. Now, if we say, as an example, Trump and Obama are the only US presidents, right? If they are the only US presidents, then no one else is. There are no other US presidents aside from these two. It's the nature of the language. We're not assuming Unitarianism. we're simply employing the language the way they're used. But for me, who was at least when I was a Trinitarian, that didn't really click in my head until after a while. After I abandoned the Trinity, it took me a little while, maybe a year or two, before I realized that, yeah, the language does force us to accept that there's no one else who is the true God there.
Right.
So the Father alone.
Right. So the reason I brought up that alternate reading, is because I found it in an evangelical commentary, the famous Myers New Testament commentary, who says it was unnecessary. Moreover, even a perversion of the passage, running counter to the strict monotheism of John, when, get this, Augustine, Ambrose, Hilary, and others explained it as if the language were, including basically the Jesus in the statement, the only true God. And then Mayer says, this is an evangelical scholar, so I hope people go on to research this. Only one, the Father, can absolutely be termed the only true God. And then Mayer, amazingly enough, adds Romans 9:5. So he's reading Romans 9:5 as applying it to the Father as well. Not at the same time Christ, who is not even in 1 John 5:20, the only true God. Can you believe that? This is an evangelical commentary here. Quite amazing.
Wow.
So
wow,
yeah,
that's pretty scandalous right there.
Scandalous is a very good word. So let's hope people do their homework. And any last words before I let you go here? We've gone a bit longer than we thought.
Yeah, I would like to.
Sorry, your connection is, and apologies for the connection as well. It hasn't helped tonight. Maybe it's a heavy traffic night.
Thanks.
Sorry, you froze again. Just give me a minute. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, nope, it froze again. Sorry, folks.
Do I look cold or?
Yes, you're very cold. Hold on. Very bad connection tonight. You're still frozen? Frozen in time. All right, go ahead. You're good now.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that I'm planning to put together my own video of some details in my paper, and this is great, Carlos. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity, and I hope the listening audience had learned some things. If you're a Trinitarian and you believe that we have committed error or
sorry, you're freezing up. So no, thank you, Aaron. So I'll let you go because the connection is very bad. So if anyone wants to read more about this, this is Aaron's blog. You can go there, realgjesus.blogspot.com. So he's got a couple of articles, and you can go ahead, Aaron. Did you?
Yeah. By the way, I no longer write on that blog. I stopped for a while, and although maybe someday, but I have my own YouTube channel now, and I have another blog that I started.
But this is still recommended, these articles you posted?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And you tell a bit about yourself here, Trinitarian No More. So
right.
All right. And if you want a copy, by the way, of the journal, get them to contact you, and I'll put your contact details
Yeah, I can email them
at the bottom of
a PDF version of my paper.
right. And
It's not going to look like, you know, the actual journal published by Southern Evangelical Seminary, but it's just the paper.
right.
You know,
And
it's in an article, paper form, like
And
an essay
people-
form.
and people can contact you at what is it?
Life here and then at gmail.com.
Sorry, live here and then. Was that right?
That's correct.
Live
Yeah.
here and then at gmail.com. So I'll put that at the bottom of this video. And okay, thanks again, Aaron. And we're so blessed. I've been very blessed by your testimony and your staunch your staunch continued pursuit for the truth. Because I like the way you put it. If anyone out there who disagrees and thinks we have given you false information, please let us know. I'm easily contactable as well on Facebook and so on.
Yeah, here is what I want to say also before I say goodbye. I'm going to ask you a question there, dear Trinitarian. Is it possible that you could be wrong about the Trinity and specifically about the deity? If you allow that possibility, then you should be open to it. You know, just be honest. And
right.
From my perspective, it took me 3 years and complete. Can you hear me?
You're freezing up again. Yeah. So Aaron, you were asking people out there who oppose this view that has it entered your brain, your mind that you could be wrong? So that's a good question.
Yeah, if you're a Trinitarian, and do you allow the possibility that you could be wrong? Well, you're going to ask me the same thing, right? I'm a biblical. Do I? Of course I do. Because I'm not perfect. I'm not infallible. You know. But let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. Let's really be respectful and civil with it. You know, maybe there are some things that I said that are wrong, and you know, please bring them up. That is why we discuss things, we debate, we argue, you know, intelligently. And for those of you who don't know, there is that Trinity's Facebook group. I'd like to invite everyone there to participate. You know, Muslims, Trinitarians, Biblical Unitarians, and this is headed by Dr. Dale Tuggy.
Right. So yes, please come on in and talk to us here if you want, or just like Aaron said, email us. So thank you once again, Aaron, and apologies for the technical issues tonight, but I hope this was worthwhile.
All right. Good evening.
Thank you.